Are you sometimes emotionally affected by what, like, have you seen something where you're like, man, that, like, you put the camera down and you just kind of sat and thought about it, like, where the, like, almost this perception of emotional suffering from an animal, that it would, you'd feel it too then, almost on reflection, or how do you kind of deal with that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, 100%. I, I have a really weird example to illustrate that, and I have to try to tell it in a very short story. Um, I followed a family of cranes at one time early on doing this for about 3 months, and I wanted to document like the life and birth of their baby, and then the trials and tribulations that it went through to kind of show people the struggle that these animals have. Again, back to the we don't have it as bad as we think type of mentality. And it was a great learning experience. And the end result was nothing I would have ever anticipated. In my mind, I was like, okay, I see the local predators like an alligator or this bird or that bird. They're going to be the bad guys in the play, so to speak, trying to take the baby. But in the end, the experience was disrupted by a human, and it was something that I would have never anticipated. Long story short, I got very close with his family. They let me in. Many times I just sat with them and just watched, in amazement at what they were doing. And they were never really bothered by my presence. Not like I went up to them. There were times where I'd park myself in a specific place and they would come to me and just kind of surround me. Then you have to put the camera down. You have to, and just kind of understand what's happening around you and just watch it, to be present. But ultimately, what happened was a really bizarre experience. The mother ended up getting hit by a car and was in a ditch on the side of the road. And in this experience, I showed up one day and I couldn't find the whole family. I could only find two, and I could tell it was the father and the chick. And the father was making this really bizarre noise, almost mourning noise that I'd never heard them make before. And it was very upsetting to me. I knew something was extremely wrong. I had to leave the area because a storm rolled in, and I went home and I got my son, and I wanted to bring him back to ground me because I was emotionally invested in this family. And I wanted him to be there to say, hey, yeah, maybe you're overreacting to all this. So we get back to this little place where they were, and the male is still there, and he's still making this really sad, mournful noise. And I looked at my son, like the male kind of started to approach us, and I looked at my son and said, oh my God, I know what's happened. The female's been hit by a car, and she's in a ditch on the side of the road. And my son looked at me and goes, okay, now you're overreacting, Dad. That's not what's going on here. And as soon as I said that to him, the male went around us and started to go outside of this facility where we were, towards the road, towards the ditch. And I said, we got to follow him. He's going to show us where she is. And sure enough, that's what he did. He led us to where she was and then left. And we tried to save her. Ultimately, she couldn't survive. She had been hit by a car, and it was devastating for her. We took her to an animal rehab. They tried their best and ultimately had to euthanize her like within 48 hours. I still to this day cannot explain how I came to that conclusion that she was in a ditch on the side of the road and been hit by a car. I had no prior knowledge to any of that, and I'm glad my son was there to see it as well, because had he not been there, nobody I think would have ever believed me. That tore me up for a good 5 or 6 days. I was very, 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 very sad about that whole experience. But what's even more bizarre, and this one is really hardcore, is I watched this family do what they did, and I watched the female, get taken out by a human and die. And I found myself 3 years later in almost the same exact situation. My wife of 25 years had an like instant aneurysm and died within 12 hours. And so I was kind of in the same exact situation as this Sandhill Crane family. Now here I am with my two surviving children. Granted, they had one, and I now need to kind of continue on with my kids. So there was this parallel there that was almost foreshadowing what would happen to me in the future, which was it's very weird to look at it now from a different perspective, um, from a somewhat healed perspective. I don't think you really ever heal from this type of experience, but it's interesting to see it now and to see those parallels again, and to kind of dig in and use that as like the motivation to strive and continue, to keep going through these tough situations. So yes, it has affected me emotionally on several instances, for sure. I think it's hard not to. I don't think I would want to not be affected emotionally by it, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Very sorry to hear about your wife, Mark. That's an incredible story in terms of just the connection you're making to foreshadowing as well. Like what that's and then just as you've been kind of touching on all the time, like how the animals and their instinct to survive is the thing that you find almost most inspirational, and then this tragic situation in your own life appears as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it, I guess hardcore was the good way to describe it. It was pretty tough. I mean, still is, but yeah, it definitely like there was some definite healing moments too afterwards where I went out with the animals every day, and I saw that fire for survival in their eyes, and I used that in my own way to kind of work my way through a lot of this stuff. So definitely.